I wanted to talk about this story because this story is wild. So this woman right here, it's as reported on by the Oakland Press, did a hate crime at a synagogue. Went to a synagogue and put a bunch of swastikas, a bunch of really hateful stuff on it. It wasn't just on the synagogue though. It was like on random things. It was like on cars and even like a baby carriage. Just like hateful messages. But one of the messages that were put up there was Azov and like Ukraine rules or stuff. It was very strange because this seems to make it look like an Azov supporter decided that they would go after a local synagogue, and obviously that makes Azov look terrible. The idea that they could inspire an attack on a synagogue, it could maybe, you know, make Ukraine look terrible, and it caused some concern. But after the tiniest of digging by the police, they found that this woman's intention was to actually undermine support for Ukraine by doing what was essentially false flag. I guess you could call it false flag because it was done under a, you know, a false narrative. False flag hate crimes towards the Jewish community while pretending to be a supporter of Ukraine in order to undermine support for Ukraine. Let's read about it. This story is wild. An extremist U.S. woman, Randy Lucelle Nord, 35, has confessed to painting Nazi symbols on a synagogue along with the words Azov as part of a deliberate plan to undermine U.S. support for Ukraine. She was radicalized during a 2-year stay in Serbia. The suspect is accused in Royal Oak of spray painting a swastika and the word Azov on the front of a Woodward Avenue shawl on the front of the synagogue. When Nord was arraigned on charges in Royal Oak on May 3rd, police said she spent 2 years in Serbia, where she apparently had become radicalized and returned to the U.S. in early March. She confessed to the crimes at the synagogue in Royal Oak, police said, and further told them that she also painted a swastika on a child stroller and on a car at a synagogue in the Oak Park. As of Friday, no charges had been filed against her in the Oak Park District Court. She said she planned to do as many hate crimes as possible and blamed them on Azov. Royal Oak Detective Dan Peltier testified at Nord's arraignment in Royal Oak. The purpose of the hate crimes was aimed at undermining the U.S. support for Ukraine. So this is the majority of the story. The rest of this is just like finer details, but you get the general idea here that this was a woman trying to pretend to be either a fighter in Azov, a member of the Azov movement, or, you know, tied to Azov in some way, maybe just a supporter, going out and vandalizing synagogues with the words like Azov and pro-Ukraine stuff to make Ukraine look bad, so then maybe members of the American Jewish community or Americans would look at this and say, wow, these Ukrainians are pretty bad. They're inspiring hate crimes. We don't want to inspire hate crimes, and we don't want to send money to into a movement that's inspiring hate crimes. We don't want to do that, so we're not going to send aid anymore. That was the idea. Was this a smart plan? No, because now if you get caught, all this is going to happen is if there's ever something that's actually inspired by somebody hateful from Ukraine, everybody's going to suspect now that it's a false flag. So if something like this would even naturally happen, which I'm not even saying that it would, but even if something was to happen in the future, it's going to be impossible for people to believe it. This is going to make people 10 times more suspicious for any type of, oh, Ukraine did this, Ukraine did that, hate crime in the future, because people are going to start thinking back to this incident. And all this did was make the opposition to Ukraine look absolutely bonkers, terrible, god awful. And this makes the support for Russia look terrible, since this was done to undermine Russia's war effort in Ukraine. So this ended up backfiring majorly. But I think it also shows that they really, really, really can't deal with the fact that the majority of Americans support sending aid to Ukraine. And so they have to find some way to turn America against aid to Ukraine. And it's always with lies and it's always with deceit, whether it's RFK going on Tucker Carlson and saying, oh, and he recently did this on other programs as well. I think he said the same thing on Breaking Points, that for every one Russian that dies in combat, 7 Ukrainians die. Completely made up, fabricated numbers that he just is regurgitating after being corrected. He suggested that we were trying to place nuclear weapons in Ukraine with no evidence. Tucker Carlson also regurgitated those terrible numbers, those unfounded numbers of 7-1 casualties on his show before suggesting that Ukraine already has nuclear weapons. It seems that everybody that opposes aid to Ukraine has to lie in order to do it, has to be deceptive in order to do it, because the argument to arm Ukraine is moral. The argument to arm Ukraine is easy to make. And so the only way you can argue against it is by launching false flags, lying, and trying to deceive people. And I think that shows the righteousness of Ukrainian liberation, the righteousness of the cause that we support.